Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and as always, this is my co-host.
And my name is Chris Huddleston.
And today we are trying something new with video. It occurs to me that we posted the audio as usual with no heads up that we were going to do video last time. And maybe people who listen heard the audio from Congo where we're talking as though they can see us. And of course, on that platform, there is no visual. So we didn't tell them how to get to YouTube, right?
Okay.
So we have a YouTube channel. If you want to see the video, I think it's Chris and Chris Talk Movies. I don't know. How do you find us on YouTube? Do you have any idea how that works? If you go to YouTube and you search for Chris and Chris Talk Movies, we'll get better at this.
We will put a link in the description of the podcast.
Yes, that's what we'll do. We will get better at this and we'll give you a link. And if you're just listening in the audio like you usually do, that's what's happening.
We will try to not do, there are some other podcasts I noticed who will do this where there are video and audio, and there'll be something that you have to see. But if you're listening to the podcast, you can't see it. So we'll try to avoid that, other than the trailer.
Yeah. We did put the visual trailer in for Congo, and I'm going to do that again this week for this movie. But you'll have the audio and the audio version of it anyway. This is a work in progress. So today
we're figuring it out.
We're using Zoom to record this podcast. And last week we did the Zencaster video, and I think it's going to look a little different until we figure it out. And that's part of the fun.
Mm-hmm. You're seeing the sausage being made.
This is yes.
Or hearing the sausage being made, which maybe is kind of gross. I don't know.
Yeah, right. That phrase, when you think about it, turns people off of it. Anyway. Yeah. Okay, so today we are very excited to be talking to you about the 1990 or 91? 1991 thriller Shattered. Okay. So I had never seen this one before. This was a suggestion that you made. You had seen it, correct?
I was completely unaware of this film until about 6 months ago, and I saw it and then watched it again for the podcast. So
yes. All right. So I'll go first.
You want to go with the synopsis?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay.
I'm not used to being able to see you, so it's throwing me off my game.
So it's a 1991 film, as we said. And here's the synopsis. Dan Merrick, played by Tom Berenger, and his wife, Judith, Greta Scacchi, I don't know how you pronounce her name, have a car accident. Judith is thrown free, but Dan is injured, his face disfigured. He comes out of a coma with amnesia, full of general knowledge, but completely ignorant of his own family life. Slowly, he begins to put the pieces back together, but there are troubling memories that don't mesh with the stories he's being told. And he hires private detective Gus Klein, played by Bob Hoskins, to help unravel the mystery of his past. All right. So,
right.
Yeah, and so you had not seen it.
I had not seen it, and we're going to spoil it. And this is one of those thrillers where it sets up a bunch of possibilities, and then there's all kinds of crazy hairpin twists and turns at the end. And we're going to talk about all of it.
Yeah, let's do this, that disclaimer. We will spoil, and this is something along the lines of there were a lot of these in the late 80s, early to mid 90s, things like Double Jeopardy. I think it falls in that category, these kind of crazy.
Or even Primal Fear, which we discussed in an earlier episode, where there's this crazy twist at the end. It's like, oh no.
So if you like those kind of films and you're not familiar with this, I think this movie is somewhat obscure. Then check it out and then come back and hear what we have to say if you like. So, all right.
Right. That being disclaimed. Yes. So, it's Tom Berenger. I like Tom Berenger. I started watching this movie. It's set in San Francisco. As it seems like a lot of these films at that time were in San Francisco for some reason. But
Basic Instinct that we covered a while back was San Francisco.
And I want to talk about the first half of the movie first. Mm-hmm. So halfway through this movie, like I was saying to my wife who likes this genre, I was like,
did she watch it with you?
She did not.
Okay.
For just because of reasons of when I ended up watching it. Like we were going to watch it that night, and then I don't remember if one of the kids had a tantrum, something, and we just weren't in the mood to watch it anymore. So I ended up watching it the next day. But halfway through, I thought, she'd really dig this. This is pretty good. How did I never hear about this movie? Right? Because it's hitting all the numbers. It's this whole genre, and I think the early 90s can feel a little overripe now with the hair and the shoulder pads and everything.
Sure.
Bob Hoskins, who is great, is in this. He is an ex-private eye. I guess he still sort of moonlights as a private eye who owns a pet store. Yeah. And he is doing his Roger Rabbit, New York accent, which is good. It's a good New York accent. It's really thick, So
considering he was a British man, it's
that's
not
right.
bad.
Right. It's plausible. But so there's a scene where he shows up to meet Richard Gere, and he's wearing like a brand new New York Yankees ball cap. And I just thought that was gilding. Like, oh, he's from New York. He's so obviously playing. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I used to drive a cab. I'm like, come out here. Okay, we got it. So the whole thing is a little overripe. In his pet store, all the animals are out of their cages. They're just it's a place with a back office where he has a desk, and there's just a monkey and 5 cats, and a snake is loose, and it's just like, oh, these crazy ex-PI pet store owners. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing has this vibe of like, so and Richard Gere is rich. The lead characters in a lot of these movies are rich, but he's like crazy rich and powerful. He's an architect, and they're all driving Rolls Royces and fancy cars, and it all feels a little over the top to me, but it's good, and right off the get you get this premise that there's a car accident. The doctor's telling his wife, oh, he's got amnesia. I'll be level with you. He may never regain it. Might come back. Might be a week. Might be 6 weeks. He might never be back. And you go, okay, so that's the baloney pill we have to swallow in the beginning. And here we go. Most movies start with a sort of something. And all the way through half of the movie, we discover like, it looks like there's a roll of film in his sort of private lockbox where it's got pictures of his wife, having an affair with somebody. And, so you start to be like, oh, and there's sort of his partner's wife is being very flirtatious and strange with him. And you start to think, aha, well, yes, he's forgotten a lot of, interesting things that we're going to uncover here. It's actually a little further than halfway through the movie. It's more like 2/3 of the way through the movie. It just completely goes off the rails in the same way that their car goes off the highway.
That's a good analogy. Yeah.
It just takes a hard left, and you're flying through the air. And there were so many places where I literally had to pause it and be like, wait, what? What is happening here? And I enjoyed it. I thought it was entertaining, but it goes bonkers crazy in terms of straining plausibility. There's a bunch of little stuff, and I know I'm rambling on here, but there's a bunch of little stuff like, so their office is in the Transamerica building, which is the big skyscraper in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco for 6 years. And one of their big projects it turns out they're kind of sleazy, sketchy dudes that like to grease the wheels to get their big projects done that aren't environmentally friendly. And, they're sort of bad guys in the corporate
and
way.
The partner is played by Corbin Bernsen.
Yes. Who's great
favorite of the
in the
90s.
role.
Yeah.
Yes. But is totally plausible as a kind of a,
sleazy
slimy,
guy.
Rich guy. You're right. And so one of the things that they have this big marina deal that they're doing. And the sketchy thing about it is they had to pay off some EPA people to get it moving because there is like a tanker ship that is sort of aground and it was full of toxic waste.
Yeah, it just has toxic waste.
Just off on the shore of San Francisco where they want to develop them. So if it's Raccoon City or, somewhere in Czechoslovakia that you've never been to, maybe you just go with it. But, San Francisco it's a small town, and there's just the idea that some tanker full of toxic waste sort of crashed, or they go in it. It's like a location. It's a cool location in the movie too.
Yeah, it's spooky in the movie.
At one point he follows his wife and she goes driving down through the fog, and she goes driving down these roads. I'm like, where is this? It's this magical part of San Francisco that doesn't exist. And it's crazy ramshackle little huts, but there's nobody there. It's the middle of the day. It's absolutely deserted in the middle of the day. And he goes down and she follows her, and there's this sort of ship that you can get to, that there's like a dock to, and you can go in the ship, and there's nobody in there either. And it'd be crawling with homeless people. And it turns out to be a pivotal, climactic place in the movie. But architecturally, this idea of this is set in San Francisco, and a lot of it takes place, down in the old toxic ship ruin. About a quarter of the way through, that stuff starts, and then it just gets worse and worse, and you're like, it's crazy. And when we get to the end, we can unpack that together, but I've been going on a long monologue until now. So what, you tell me, but you've seen it twice now.
Yeah, I've seen it twice. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It has this is definitely not as good a film as something, and this is not really in the category of erotic thriller like A Basic Instinct. There's not really sex scenes and stuff in this,
there's
like
a couple, but it's not the point.
Right.
It's a spice in the stew.
Yeah, but it's not meant to be like super salacious like A Basic Instinct.
Right.
And this is definitely not as well made a film as that. I would say it looks kind of almost made for television, to a degree. It's not like super well shot. I mean, it's competently made, but it's not as glossy as a Basic Instinct, I would not say, or some of those other thrillers of that time. But it is very fun. Like you said, when you get to that sort of 2/3 point, and we'll get to the twist in a moment, but because it's just so ridiculous and silly. And I will admit to I'm really terrible at guessing twists or who the killer is or that kind of thing, because I don't necessarily try all that hard. I get kind of wrapped up in the acting and the cinematography and all that, and I just kind of go with it. So I'm not like from the opening scene saying, oh, I bet this is what happened. But that being said, was this a twist that you would have guessed?
No, not in a million years.
Yeah.
So bodies start turning up, right? And it turns out it seems like the lover, Jack Stanton, right? It seems like he might have gotten killed. Exactly.
Great name.
Seems like maybe he got killed, and the first one of the early things you think is, so this guy who doesn't have a memory, you killed the lover, buddy. Like, maybe you're going to be haunted by this horrible truth that comes out. Of course, then he has a conversation with his partner's wife, who definitely is attracted to him. Whether or not they used to have a sexual history is unclear, but she says, you have to understand, don't you remember anything? Your wife is crazy. Like, your wife is insane, and she was seeing this Jack guy the whole time, and she's a pathological liar, and you can't trust her, right? And she's saying it with such intensity that you think, well, you're the crazy one, and maybe you're the one who's been shooting bullets and killing people. And that's the kind of groundwork it lays for that twist. You're like, oh, it was, the mother-in-law or the sister-in-law all along. And they just do a little bait and switch that way. Or maybe you go, oh, well, maybe it is the wife, and they're going to kind of try and double back on that. And they do all of those things. But, we get we get the private eye gets involved because he just won't let this go. So he's always sniffing around and coming back to him. And then we sort of get on the private eye side and we're wondering, well, is it possible that Richard Gere has remembered more than he thought?
Not Richard Gere. What's his name again?
Oh, right. No, I'm sorry, not Richard Gere. I'm totally spacing on the guy's name. Doesn't matter.
Tom Berenger.
Tom Berenger. So everything is up in the air, but where they end up going with it, right? So at a certain point, they get a panicked call. Things are really escalating, and they think they've seen Stanton, and he's not dead, and that maybe he's still in cahoots with the wife, or that maybe he's coming. Maybe he and the wife, or he alone, tried to kill them both, or tried to kill him, and maybe the wife was in on it, and he's still trying to finish the job. Mm-hmm. So there's these crazy. Oh, there's also a crazy car chase with the red Porsche or whatever that Stanton
through the woods,
the redwoods.
Yeah.
As if it's just that's not how national preserves work. You can't just have car chases through there. Anyway, it's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. And we end up learning that the body, right, Stanton's body, was disposed of. We keep getting these little flashbacks of memory that's floating to the surface. So we go to the ship to discover Stanton's body and find out the truth. And it's Tom Berenger and his PI buddy go to sort of finally get to the bottom. Oh, I'm sorry. They get a frantic call from the wife of the partner, and you have to come now. So they rush over there, and she's been murdered. Mm-hmm. And everything just keeps escalating at a mile a minute. So then he's like, look, you can. Sorry.
And the PI thinks maybe Tom Berenger has done it. Yeah.
Because Tom Berenger goes, finds her stabbed, and is kneeling over the body when the PI who has been following him comes in and goes, this looks bad. And he's like, I didn't do it. I don't remember anything. And, but I guess he trusts him, and the performance does make Tom Berenger seem sincere. Mm-hmm. He's like, at least, look, if I did it, if I didn't kill her, but if I killed Stanton, I'll face the music, I'll go to prison, but at least give me an opportunity to remember what happened. So, because this is what always happens, he does. And then that's when they go down to the ship to find the body, and they go. So here we are. We're down at the ship. We go in the ship, and then there's a huge, within this container that supposedly contains chemicals.
And
which turn out to be formaldehyde,
and they're and they're wading through it all.
Yes. There's a sort of a shadowy. You can see the body submerged.
Yeah. Why would a tanker have formaldehyde in it? Why would it be full of formaldehyde?
Because movie logic. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, why did the tanker crash? Why hasn't that been cleaned up? Why?
Yeah, you kind of just have to go with it, I guess. But I was just like, a tanker full of formaldehyde? Yeah,
because that's the joke. It's like, they thought that the body the chemicals would dissolve the body, and it's
instead
joke's on you. It's preserved it.
Yeah,
bad luck. So he reaches in. This is the pivotal scene. He reaches down in there, and you're like, you're gonna reach into this filth and you're gonna pull a dead body up. And I guess he has to know. And Tom Berenger reaches in, wincing, and pulls this body to the surface, which miraculously is feet down, right? So he can grab it by the lapels and pull it up out of the water. He pulls it up, and he's face to face with himself, right?
Yeah. Did you laugh out loud at this revelation?
Yeah,
I did. I laughed out loud just watching by myself.
We skipped something really important.
Okay,
maybe we didn't, but so there's a car crash, right? In the initial car crash, his face is absolutely destroyed. Mm-hmm. So she's out. He goes all the way down, and they do reconstructive surgery on him for weeks. Using the pictures of Tom Berenger to make him look the same again. And so at this moment, we realize, oh, the guy who himself has believed he is Tom Berenger the whole time has actually been Jack Stanton.
Mm-hmm.
And the person who was killed was Tom Berenger.
Yeah.
And it is at that moment when they're standing there agape and he's looking at this corpse of himself, which is actually a really neat shot.
It is, yeah.
Like it's corny, it's unbelievable, but you're just kind of like, well, it took guts to, orchestrate the shot. It's at that moment that the private investigator is shot. And it's the wife. And she's like, well, what did you want me to do, Jack? I couldn't tell you the truth, when I realized. And so what had happened was Berenger had discovered the affair. He had come home. He was knocking his wife around. And fiercely protective Stanton sort of came running him after him and shot him in their bedroom. Mm-hmm. And then Stanton, and the wife, who was still in love with him, went to dispose the body in the ship. And it was on the drive home when Stanton was saying, I can't do that. I'm not a part of this. She's like, we have to make a run for it. And he's like, I didn't. Oh, wait, no, she shot him. No. Who shot him? She shot him. And he witnessed it.
Yeah, yeah.
She shot her husband who was attacking her, was beating her. And
he was a bad guy.
And witnessed it. And yeah, right. Because this is a relatively nice guy in this whole movie.
And all along we think the Rick Stanton guy is a bad guy, but he's actually a good guy. And Tom Berenger is the bad guy.
Has been him all along, right?
Yeah.
So he helps her dispose of the body. And she's like, well, you're in it now. And he's like, well, no. I didn't kill anybody, right? So they're kind of arguing about it. And I think it's an accident. She doesn't really drive it over the cliff, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an accident that first time, and she's kind of immediately thrown free, and he goes over, and we know from the rest of the movie. But it doesn't stop there, because we wait. Now I'm getting foggy on exactly what happened. So
it's so convoluted that it's
right,
easy.
Right. So the PI is shot in the back, and he falls.
He falls into the formaldehyde or whatever.
Or formaldehyde adjacent other filth. He just falls in this underwater. And, Stanton, we now know is Stanton, dives in after him, tries to save him. And the wife is shooting into the water, right? She's like, what are you doing? She's like, he's gone. We have to get out of here. So they leave.
One thing that we have to, I want to stop you for just a second, because it's a great thing at the very end of the movie. Maybe my favorite thing about the whole thing is all along, he is the PI guy. Bob Hoskins he has asthma, so he has an inhaler for asthma. So that leads to a thing at the end.
Right.
So he has fallen into the toxic waste. So he's dead.
And he is dead because he's underwater for several minutes.
He's been shot. He's underwater for a long time.
While they're arguing, he's dead underwater. He's been shot in the back through the chest and has fallen into the water, under which he has, the water being toxic chemicals, under which he has been now for several minutes. So he's 100% dead. So we leave. At gunpoint, she's like, come on, we get out of here. And she's driving and he's in the passenger seat, right? And they're zooming up the highway, and she's like, we can still get away. And we're now sort of back where they were when they had the first crash, because she's saying we got to go. And he's like, this is crazy. We have to turn ourselves in. But we need to help him. We need to call, the authorities, and maybe he's still alive. And she says, basically, she says, I have a better idea. And it becomes clear that she's going to kill them both. She's going to commit suicide by driving over the edge of the road. And correct, which she does, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he jumps out just as the car goes over the cliff. So she, in despair, wants to end it all for both of them. And it's the repeat scene from the beginning, except that I guess she was driving the first time too. Wasn't she?
Yeah, she was. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But this time she intentionally goes over the cliff, whereas the first time it was an accident while they were arguing. So he just kind of does one of these stuntman rolls on the side of the road, and he's fine. And the car goes over and explodes spectacularly in a long shot. And then a helicopter lands next to him in the road. And he looks up like, what? And out of the helicopter, nimble as can be, pops Bob Hoskins. Really none the worse for wear. I mean, it looks like he's in
great shape.
He's fine. And he comes over and he's like, what? How? And he pulls out the inhaler and he's like, I got my own tank.
Yeah.
You want a pop?
I love that line. I love that.
Yeah. What about the bullet through your chest?
He just got patched up a little bit.
Yeah, just a couple of stitches while you were underwater. I don't know.
He has a helicopter from his like buddies when he was in the, with the police or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And just handy. They just got there. Like, how did they find you in the? Oh, I guess he did. Did he call the police? So, at one point, he calls the police, and so there is precedent for him having like sent up a flare at some point. But
yeah, I loved that. I loved that part.
At a certain point, this movie started to feel like it had been written by a 14-year-old. Like then the helicopter, and then G.I. Joe is there, and he saves everything.
Okay. I got my own tank. I love that line. One thing that we left out, to backtrack a little bit. So there are the parts like when you talked about the in the redwood forest with the Porsche and all that. So there are parts where there are following the what's his name, Rick Stanton guy, and that's actually the wife dressed up, right?
Dressed, right. He comes into the room and there's Rick Stanton with his curly dark hair and his leather jacket, and Rick Stanton reaches up a la Stallone and pulls off the wig and turns around and it's his wife.
Like you wouldn't realize that this is not a man, this is his wife in disguise.
It's just, I mean, the takeaway from the movie feels like rich people are crazy. It's like they have so much money and so much to do that all they do is kill each other and dress up in crazy wigs and drive around each other's cars pretending to be each other and pin murders on each other.
And it's always the thing in movies. Again, it's you can't really nitpick too much because there's just so much crazy stuff that happens in this movie, and you either go with it or you don't. But that, in movies, they can always do this unbelievable plastic surgery, where they can make somebody look like somebody else or exactly how they used to look before. And like plastic surgery isn't like that in real life,
That makes me think of the Mission Impossible franchise with Tom Cruise, where they just kind of, which is in there. But he's got like a little vocal thing you strap across your thing. It's like, oh, see it. It does the voice or whatever. And you kind of that doesn't exist, but it's still, it's fun.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And like Face Off, where they trade faces,
Right.
Which
of course, now we actually see face transplants now. And it's really, I mean, it's amazing that they can do that, but it's, you don't look great.
No, not at all. Which they're actually, I believe, working on a Face Off remake or a sequel or something, because everything gets remade.
Sure.
But
I didn't think the first one was so great, but
so so what do you think about this in terms of, first of all, is this a genre that you like?
We were just in high school, really, at the end of the 80s and early 90s, and I loved watching movies. And thrillers like this, it would have been a little uncomfortable to watch Basic Instinct with my parents, because that was pretty sexy. But for the most part, these kind of thrillers were things that we could watch together at home, on video, or sometimes we'd go out to the movies as a family, and this was the kind of thing that all of us would enjoy. I do like the genre. What do you?
Sure, yeah. And one thing that I think about this is, and I know that people that have listened to the other episodes of similar films like this, I probably sound like a broken record, but this was a big genre at the time that kind of doesn't exist anymore. These sort of thrillers for adults. There's never any kids in these movies. It's all, middle-aged and older people. And there, even though I definitely saw some of the big ones, Basic Instinct and Fatal Attraction and those kind of things. But they made so many of these that it's fun now to go back because a lot of them I never saw. And other than I guess maybe the streaming services are kind of doing some of these kind of things as series, even, but these things do not get in the cinema anymore like they did at this time.
Right.
So I think it's fun to go back and, they're just, most of them are ridiculous, but even things like Presumed Innocent with Harrison Ford, I think is like a little bit higher brow. I don't remember it as being super crazy.
And sometimes they had a little twist. You mentioned Harrison Ford or Witness. He's a cop, and it's sort of, he goes to
I don't know if you remember or
country.
not. We saw Witness in the theater together.
No,
yeah.
I didn't remember that.
Yep.
Excuse me. I didn't remember that. That's crazy.
Which I remember being, so I don't remember what the circumstances were, because I don't know if we saw this with your dad or somehow. We probably must have, since it was rated R.
I remember seeing it with my dad. I didn't remember that you were there with us.
Yeah, we saw it together, but I remember, the scene in the beginning in the movie where there's a guy that gets killed in a bathroom. They slit his throat. And I remember, like, as a kid being really freaked out by that.
Yeah.
Really, really disturbed.
And there's a scene in which he sort of walks in on the love interest while she's taking a bath in one of those big
Kelly
tubs.
McGillis
and she's naked, and she was gorgeous, and I was like, girls.
Yeah, exactly.
And my dad.
Yeah. But yeah, that one's a classic, and so I don't know, it seems like these thrillers for adults are not made now, other than, like, as I said, I think maybe Netflix and some of the other streaming services, they're making almost more series of these kind of things. So Lifetime movies or that kind of thing.
Yeah, the episodic and the hour-long format seems to, because you can take the character and you can take the, characters, and you can have them go through recurring, right? Like Harrison Ford, it could be a whole season or a whole series of seasons about that character. And once you got through one arc of a storyline, you could start the next. They're not comparatively expensive to shoot.
Yeah, there's not a lot of special effects and, that kind of thing. But I these kind of stories lend themselves really well to a 90-minute format, I think.
Yeah.
So
I agree. So, I mean, would you recommend it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this one is definitely on the goofier end of the spectrum. Like I said, I think it's something along the lines of, which I don't remember this movie all that well, other than it being silly, but like a Double Jeopardy with Ashley Judd.
Right.
She did several of those. She was kind of the queen of that for a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you like, if you're not too wrapped up in everything being 100% believable, if you like the crazier aspects of these kind of films, then and it has a really good cast, and as I said, it's competently made. There's nothing spectacular about the music or the cinematography or any of that, but
it just gets a little Dan Brown with like how life works, Oh, it turns out the secret order, and it's all been the Illuminati all along. Okay.
And it's one of those things where if, some of even though we watched a lot of these at that time, we were also kids. So we had no concept of what it was like to be an adult. And at the time, you're just kind of like, is this how adults behave? Is this what, it's like? And then you realize, no, it wasn't at all. Like you said, it seems as if it were written by a 14-year-old boy.
Yeah, I would recommend this too, with my usual caveat of it's not one of the A-list greats of this genre.
No.
Which is
If you've
why
seen all the A-list ones and then now you're working your way down, this
which
is
is
a
why
B-list
you've
one.
never heard of it.
Yeah.
Right? You've never heard of it because it's bonkers.
I
But
think it made, I think it said was like the box office was $11 million. I'm sure it cost more than that to make. Even though it wasn't a big budget, it probably cost 20 or 30 million, even at that time to make. So yeah, it doesn't seem that it did all that well in cinemas.
but I thought it was entertaining,
Yeah.
and I did get a couple of, laughs out of it that obviously clearly the filmmaker did not intend for it to be a funny moment, but some of it is just so like when he sees himself, you just go like, oh
I mean, do you
God.
think that was meant to be?
You go, of course it's him. What's the other reveal?
Yeah.
It's not Stanton at all. Who have we met? We haven't met anybody else in the movie. It can only be like, oh, that's why they did that crazy reconstructive surgery on him, because it wasn't ever him. But
do you think the filmmaker or the filmmakers meant this to be a very serious film, or if did they know this was kind of silly?
I think my guess would be that they gave themselves license to play very loosely with credibility and plausibility, right? Because that's what this genre is: a thriller. It's escapism. It's not about, it's not a police procedural. It's not about crossing every T and dotting every I. It's about the big turns in the road and being a fast and exciting ride with surprises, and so I think they did that. And I think that the risk with that is you take a turn too sharp. I don't know where I'm going with this metaphor. I'm back on the highway with them before they go off the you take some of those turns too sharp, and even the viewer sort of like, physics doesn't work this way. Like, you know what I mean? I fine. I went with it. I go with it. Right. But if your story breaks the rules of the universe you create yourself, it takes me out of it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like we see all these new Star Wars movies, and if it starts to not feel like Star Wars anymore, then it takes me out of it. But I don't mind that it's new faces and now it's diverse and other things. I'm like, yeah, well, it should be diverse. It's the universe. There's like green aliens. There should be some humans with different colored skin, right? But if somebody starts behaving or doing something in a way that doesn't feel like the Star Wars universe, then I'm kind of like, that was weird, and I can't really get past it. And this one was fine 2/3 of the way through, and then it was like, what? But in a great way. So I mean, if you're down with that, I'd be like, yeah, it was a great B thriller with A-list actors.
Yeah. And I'll say, I don't know if it's just the time that we grew up, but I love, just in general, private eye stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like because there were so many, especially on television when we were kids, you had Magnum PI and all these other kind of other similar shows, like private detective things were just like, oh, if you watch TV, you're just like, hey, everybody's a private detective,
right.
And that, unless they're doing a typical, and especially like a noir throwback kind of a thing, you don't really see private detective stuff that much now.
No.
That I can think of off the top of my head.
No.
So I kind of, almost anything with a private detective, I'll give a shot,
It's interesting. I wonder, I'm sure there are theses on this, but now it feels like NSA, it feels like national security type thriller.
That stuff is big, yeah.
If it's not a police procedural, like trying to catch the guy who's killing the women, it's trying to catch the terrorist or trying to catch the, right? And that started to happen with Lethal Weapon, and the stakes started to rise, where it wasn't just person A murdered, or person A turns up dead. Was it B, C, or D? Who did it? it wasn't just a murder mystery. It was someone's trying to hurt a lot of people.
Yeah.
And this person or this team of people needs to beat them to the finish line before they can.
And maybe that just stems from, terrorism obviously existed when we were kids, but it was kind of like a far away thing. And really, until 9/11, that wasn't, we didn't think about terrorism.
Right.
It wasn't something that really affected us. So,
right.
So I don't know, but yeah, detective stuff tends to appeal to me. Another thing, Bob Hoskins, I feel like for our generation and probably even younger people, it's Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've seen, and he did a ton of movies, but I don't know that I've seen a lot of other things that Bob Hoskins did other than Roger Rabbit.
He's really good. I mean,
yeah.
he takes a lot of difficult to deliver dialogue
Mm-hmm.
and he delivers it convincingly with ease and charm.
Yeah.
And you think that's pretty good. I mean, that's a pro right there. And he's doing it in a very thick, but very plausible New York accent. I mean, I'd be lying if there weren't people all over New York that spoke just like that.
Sure.
They're kind of, anybody who speaks with the crazy cliche, whether it's the old Maine sea salt or the North Dakota mom, whatever it is, you think they're kind of a parody of themselves, but that's where the parody comes from because it's real.
And he seems to be having a lot of fun.
He does.
In this movie.
Yeah, he does. He does, and kudos to him because this movie's crazy.
Yeah.
It
started raining hard here. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but we're having a hard rain.
Yeah, I can vaguely hear that. What do you want to do for next time?
So we talked about Malignant, which is new. That movie that's on HBO Max. That's another really ridiculous movie if you want to go that route. And I don't know were there other things that we mentioned? I know there were a couple of sci-fi things that I had seen on some lists and kind of brought up. I don't know if I'll go back through our
list. Here. I was just watching another Dune thing. You had mentioned that you had a friend or a student who had seen it because it's been released and thought it was excellent.
Yeah.
There's a featurette about the different houses that I was watching earlier today on YouTube, and the look of the film is really great. So I'm still super excited to see it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then that's like October 22nd, I think.
Yeah.
We also talked about. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I did watch Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I've
great.
I completed the whole Indiana Jones trilogy, and yeah, it really is the best. That movie just snaps right along. I think.
Yeah, even though I love Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and they're kind of Raiders and Temple of Doom are kind of 1A and 1B for me. I think Raiders is a clearly better made film.
There's no fat in that movie.
No.
It is just, and I remember in the final climactic scene of that, I remembered thinking, like, I went back just to see how long that sequence actually was, because I'm like, wow, that goes so fast. Like that, they are there and they're doing it, and then he's laughing. Oh, and then the angel of death, and they're all toast, and then and the lid, and you're like, wow, that was like, I remember that scene being like this huge epic. I mean, it's epic in what happens, but even that last scene is just boom, 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 over,
Mm-hmm.
And you gotta admire
now the same
that.
friend who was talking about Dune, we were actually talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he brought up, and I had heard this elsewhere, so this idea, was already out there, but a criticism of Raiders is that you can basically take Indiana Jones out of the story and it still happens. Like, he doesn't prevent anything from happening.
Right.
The Nazis still get the Ark, and so he didn't even have to be there. They could have,
That's a good point. And I
which
think
I'm sure there are
watching it,
other movies that you could make the same argument,
I remember this when I rewatched Star Wars as an adult, because we saw it as children, and we were the target demographic, and it got us hook, line, and sinker. And Raiders was like that for me. Watching it as an adult, it did. I mean, I was still on board and I still love it, but it did strike me how comic booky this idea of the swashbuckling archaeologist, this tomb raider, really is. The whole concept of it is
okay.
It's just how implausible both certainly Star Wars, but Star Wars is very much pitched at a child's mindset. Like, kind of short for a stormtrooper, aren't you? Huh? Oh, they're just the love triangle, and it all just felt so juvenile. And in Indiana Jones, the idea that there's a bad version of him that shows up. So Dr. Jones, once again, we see there's nothing, he just takes he's always like beating him to the punch, and how black and white, or rather how painted in primary colors those storylines are, like the newsprint that comic books were printed on. It was a comic book movie, really, before that was a thing.
It's interesting I don't necessarily put Raiders in this category, but it's interesting to go back and watch those 80s movies and see how much simpler they are compared to films. Films today are a lot more complex. That doesn't mean they're smarter or better or anything, but they're definitely much like, I just recently, in the last few months, watched the original Ghostbusters, and you just watch that and it's very simple.
Yep.
There's just not a whole, I mean, it's it's fun, but there's not a whole lot to it. And the 80s, 70s and 80s movies in general are like that. You watch them and it's like, wow, they're so simple, and movies now are just a lot more complex.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you compare like the Avengers, that is so complex that it gets boring at some point, that first Avengers movie. But I don't think, if there was no Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark, I don't know that you'd ever have the Avengers. Like, it's so, the entire comic book genre. And I know they made the first Superman movie in the 80s, but I just feel like Spielberg pioneered the way you can take that two-dimensional comic book material and make it viable on screen with live action folks, right? And you sell it with brio, and you kind of keep things clipping along. And again, I didn't write a thesis on it, but I feel like that must have been written more than one time.
Yeah, I would think so.
I don't know what to do for next time.
I mean, we can figure it out. Let it be a surprise. We talked about another that I brought up was Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell, which you said you've not seen.
Oh yeah, and I know somebody who was in that.
Yeah. That's an entertaining one. That's both of those movies. So what got me thinking about Drag Me to Hell is Malignant. Is James Wan, who did, I don't know what, Saw movies and some other stuff, and then he went on to Fast and the Furious, and then he did the Aquaman movie. I think he's doing the second Aquaman movie, but he came back to horror with this Malignant film, and it was kind of like, okay, I've made all this money for these studios, and now I'm going to do this thing that I want to do, this goofy horror movie with a pretty big budget. And Sam Raimi started out with the Evil Dead movies, and then went on and did 3 Spider-Man films, and then came back and did Drag Me to Hell, which is, feels a lot like the Evil Dead movies with more of a budget and bigger stars and everything.
Maybe we should do that. I was curious about that at the time, and
I saw it once in the theater and I've not seen it since. I enjoyed it, but I haven't revisited it, so I don't remember a lot about it.
All right,
but that'd be a fun one.
Let's do that.
Okay.
One. So for next time, we're going to do Drag Me to Hell, and I'm coming down to Parkersburg, so maybe we will get to do the next one together in person.
Yeah, that'd be great. It could be a very special episode.
Very special episode. Chris and Chris talk movies together.
Yeah. But yeah, that should be a lot of fun. I mean, I assume Drag Me to Hell will be, we haven't looked yet, but would be easy to find streaming. With tonight's film Shattered, it's on Amazon, and I think you can get it on Apple TV, and so it's easy to find. Yeah, you know, occasionally we'll try to do these, and then it's like, oh, it's not streaming anywhere.
Yeah, we'll be surprised by the fact that we can't get it. Oh, one of the things we had talked about doing closer to Halloween, which we're coming up on, it was Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, which I don't know if I've seen it in its entirety. So
what would be really fun, and I'm not going to be able to be there with you for that, is if you can find a live screening. Those are really fun to do, midnight screenings where everybody dresses up. Maybe they're not still doing that anymore, but I remember when we were in college, that was a thing that happened.
Yeah, I think it's still going on. I mean, I don't know with COVID if what's happening with that, or and that, now that you mentioned that, going back to Sam Raimi, they are doing whatever it is, 40th anniversary or whatever, Evil Dead in the theaters. I think it's a 4K, but it's going to be one of those things where it's a one night thing.
Yeah,
I think it's October 7th. But that was something that it's not playing here. So it's like the closest place that for me would be like 35 miles. And I don't think I'm it's on a weeknight. So I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. But, but that's a pretty cool thing that is happening. So
cool.
Yeah.
All right. So Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com. We do have the YouTube channel now, if you want to check out our foray into the visual medium. Otherwise, please stick with us here on your usual listening channel. We're going to continue to post both. We're on the socials. You can send us suggestions, feedback.
We appreciate any of that.
Absolutely. And we appreciate you. Thank you for joining us yet again. So, and any final words?
I don't have any that I can think of.
All right, great. Then I guess we will talk to you next week.